Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show. Today, we're discussing the autonomous enterprise with industry practitioner and Gartner ambassador Doug Shannon, plus headlines for digital leaders. We're live the first and third Wednesday of each month at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology, with a special focus on automation, AI, and digital transformation in hopes of making you a better digital leader. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. Check us out at irpaai.com. My co-host is Chris Surdak. He's a former advisor for the White House Chief Transformation Office, automation AI practice lead at EY, and former partner for digital transformation at Gartner. Chris, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you? From soggy Southern California.
Yeah, I got some sun here in New York too. It's only 28 degrees, but it's sunny.
Yeah, we've had a week of rain, and I think we have another week coming. The atmospheric river. It sounds very intimidating.
There you go. What's happening in the news? Anything catching your attention?
It's recently, I think I mentioned it before. There was a great study that came out that we hope to touch base on a little bit from the legal industry and the potential impact of AI in the legal industry. What I like about this particular example out of the University of Minnesota Law School is they're starting to look at not so much the technology, but the pragmatic implications of using the technology in sort of knowledge worker arenas, such as the law. So I think we're at the point now where a lot of the initial technology hype, the shiny penny effect of generative AI over the last year is kind of calming down, and people are now getting into the pragmatic aspects of it. Yeah, it's cool and neat and great technology. How do we actually put it to practical use? Where do we use it, and where the value-added use cases are found? So I find that to be really interesting and something we're going to dig into some more.
Yeah, I was reading into, we've talked a lot about in the show about the tech layoffs, but, despite all of that recent tech layoff news, the AI market's only going to grow, right? I think it's one stat I saw is it's expected to grow 20x by 2030, and 73% of organizations in the US are adopting AI in some form. LinkedIn had something last week that said AI consultant job listings are the fastest growing job search role, up 141% over last year. So in the last year. So, this is going to become, part and parcel. And, one of the things that, made me kind of think about this a little bit is, they're talking about this being such a strategic role, not just a role that's growing within organizations, but such a strategic role because it's, in a lot of cases, more closely tied to business outcomes and transformation than previous, automation, RPA, traditional data analytics and IT roles.
I would say yes, but, or yes, and actually. My prior books, certainly we were looking at the potential impact of these technologies 10, 12 years ago. And that's a combination of social media, it's machine learning and so forth. And I think the impacts we are seeing are kind of similar. They're just happening so much faster, right? It's the same equation, but the frequency is dramatically faster. And so that means that the need to respond and the response is going to be much greater. So I think it's sort of the same swing in magnitude, but it's just compressed in time, right? But yeah, the job postings and so forth, it's just completely out of control. And I'm on some news group where they're talking about they keep track of recent investments by private equity and venture capital and so forth in specifically AI, and it was like $250 million just in the last month. So I think you're right. In as much as there may be contraction in other parts of the market, that the toothpaste is going to be squeezed out of that tube, and it's going to go all over the AI tube or the AI brush, if you will.
Well, and it's not just private industry. I think the government is going to be hiring these guys as quickly as private industry. We talked last week with the former chief innovation officer at the FDIC and Department of Homeland Security executives about kind of the government and the regulation side of this. But there was an article in the Times about the FTC now launching an inquiry into Amazon, Google, Microsoft, who knows who else, about their kind of stealthy investments in AI startups. So it seems that the federal government's going to have their way in.
Yeah, my colleagues at Frontier Foundry, that's exactly one of our target markets because it's going to be such a growth niche. Governments in particular, because we kind of count on them to be sort of stable and not necessarily jumping onto all the technologies very quickly, but they providing some degree of oversight of them. So there's dual polarity in the demand there. We want people. We need to get the controlling people, the governance people, the legislators, the regulators up to speed quickly, so they can kind of get a sense for what's going on. But then you also have the adoption side internally, which is how do we drive efficiency and effectiveness into the government itself. So there it's like go quickly so you can save money, but also go slowly so we can make sure we're doing it safely. And that tension is where, frankly, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of future complexity for anyone adopting the technology.
Well, here's the good news, Chris. For a quick $3,500 that I know you got laying around over there, you can get yourself a new Apple Vision Pro.
Which I laugh at because my second book over there that I wrote 11 years ago almost predicted the Apple Vision Pro verbatim. So I'm not the least bit surprised it's out. I wonder how many of them are going to be sold at that price point. It's certainly going to be a fashion statement, and I question whether it's going to be a positive fashion statement. Right. If you remember Google Glass, it seemed kind of cool, but it got more negative feedback, I think, from a lot of people than positive. So, and I think there's already been the first traffic ticket associated with using it in a Tesla or something along those lines. So,
well,
all kinds of new issues.
So, the purpose of this show is not necessarily consumer electronics, but I do want to talk about it, and maybe, we can ask our guest today a little bit and maybe another episode, but, how does this, apply to the business world, right? I mean, can these things, or will these things, ultimately be used in the enterprise, space? Because, right now, at least, these things are like heavy. they're, and to get them on right, you gotta, kind of fiddle with them for 5 or 10 minutes to get the straps right and the fit right and be comfortable. They're also incredibly isolating, right? In a world where we've been kind of isolated for the last few years, a lot of us. I've struggled, at least with the first couple versions of this and Meta's, to find an application outside of gaming.
Well, and to your point about the immersion thing, and there's a certain Neo in the movie The Matrix aspect of this getting plugged in, and how do you unplug back out? But I also think back when I was at HP about 12 years ago, we started doing enhanced reality. So you would overlay on your visual screen, and it was great for things like navigating the engine bay of a car, or how do you route wiring through an airplane wing or something like that. And there were phenomenal use cases, but they were all sort of the sample of what could be done. And it was very compelling 10, 12 years ago. The challenge was who had the knowledge to actually create the content, who's going to make the content, validate that it's correct, keep it up to date. Literally, you had to have millions of people become movie producers out of the blue. Yeah. And maybe that's less difficult than people think, because we've all turned into TV producers since the pandemic, and we're all living on Zoom and so forth, like right now. But that was the big part of the challenge 10 years ago, is the technology was already available, but who was going to produce the content and who had both the knowledge and the talent to do so?
Yeah, for me, I think it's less about content. I mean, TVs keep getting bigger, sound systems keep getting bigger. I don't know that I'm, like people have said, oh, I'm watching a concert on my VR headset. I'm like, I've got a 90-inch TV and a Sonos sound system. Why would I do that, right? But in an enterprise setting, in a work setting where guys like us, right, we're in a global marketplace. People all over the world. There's the Zoom fatigue. I see the opportunity in kind of virtual networking. It'd be great if we had a room full of people and we felt like we were actually in the same room. So I think like virtual networking and meetings and things, there may be an application, for at some point. And you bring up a good one too, which is kind of remote, like advanced remote support, right? Where maybe the expert is, in another country, but they can kind of beam in with this kind of augmented reality and help you kind of fix something. But yeah.
Well, if I along those lines, if I may, there are a lot of excellent examples of that in the healthcare space too, with robotic surgery. And
Yeah.
right now, from a regulatory profile, at least in the U.S., and I think this is still the case, you can use medical robots, but the doctor has to be in the same room as the robot, which effectively defeats the entire purpose. Now, it makes sense from a safety perspective. What if there's a blackout, et cetera? But at some point, that regulatory kind of barrier, I think, is going to be breached. And then, I mean, if you're the world's greatest ophthalmologist or optometrist or whatever, and you're doing some eye surgery from 1,000 miles away, do you want to do that because when you live in New York City and it's really expensive, or you want to do it from a beach in Costa Rica? So again, it's a very deep global effect or globalizing effect of the knowledge workers out there. And most of the history of capitalism, there's been the tyranny of location. If you want to be in investment banking, you better be on Wall Street. And you're going to get less and less of that as the technology makes where you physically are less and less important potentially.
So let's ask our guest. Let's add Doug Shannon to the show. Doug is a practicing global intelligent automation manager and Gartner ambassador. He's also a LinkedIn top voice in AI with over 200,000 followers. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, 200,000 connected followers. I wish I had 200,000 followers, but yeah, working on that.
I like the disclaimer. Most people exaggerate. You're
yeah. I try to keep it real. Yeah. So actually, being on LinkedIn for the last 3-ish years, and this year, as of 2024, is the first time I've actually paid for it. So there's a neat little disclaimer there too. So yeah, on your guys' conversation, I think it all revolves around a simple fact of we are all battling with time. And so since we're trying to evaluate how much time we have, we're trying to evaluate different business cases, business user cases of how do we handle time between business and systems and meetings. And then considering the fact that we spend actually most of our lives alone, how do we manage that time? And so when you look at some of the World Health Organizations and what they've said like by 18, you're either with your partner of choice and then you're mostly alone. And as you get near end of life, you're more alone. And so like, what do you do? So maybe this is that mix between, hey, how do we spend our time? What does that time look like? Is it ready for enterprise? Is it going to move that way? I think there'll be some things, right? Your niche or your gig jobs or your things like that, or maybe while they're doing Uber Eats or something like that, or Grubhub, you're driving around. Maybe you are allowed to wear these things when the refresh rate hits the right measurement or whatnot. So.
Yeah, I guess the question is, back to the pros versus the cons. Does the pros outweigh the cons? I think you're right. I think there's actually some really great use cases around creating togetherness where there's not. But at least as they stand today, I see them mostly like that article we had up about. It looked like a Black Mirror episode. I also remember when that game came out. And this wasn't VR, but when that Pokemon Go came out, and everybody's looking for these fake whatever they are characters. I'm like in the local downtown by me, and I'm looking around, and it was like a Twilight Zone moment. I'm looking around. I'm like, everybody here is looking down at their phones.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is that technology itself, the same technology with Pokemon and that Go that came out, is actually even more advanced. So they're actually having the ability to overlay and using digital twins to where you can actually interact with a physical object. That physical object can actually disappear in your AR, VR view, and then it's like it's gone, and it'll actually help you walk around that now. So it's like it really is not there. It's very interesting how this can be played out.
So first of all, give everybody a little bit of background on your career, and then I'm curious as to how you think this parlays, or if it does, into the enterprise world today. Are you seeing this at all?
Yeah, I mean, my background is multifaceted from doing IT, different jobs from help desk all the way to design level at different large corporations, and then being pulled into the RPA space. And it's always funny the conversation of an IT person moving into the RPA space and saying, "Wait, why would we do this when we've always done automation?" But seeing the audit control, seeing the fact that you can build things and combine these different platforms and systems, this is like before APIs, right? Like how do we combine these things? And then even with APIs, it's fantastic, but you still have APIs that don't exactly do what they say they do. And or you have like API leakage issues, but you can also maintain that through automation. There's a lot of rigors and abilities you gain through automation, and you gain through even using automation to bridge like Gen AI and AI standards as well. So looking at that, there's a whole world of that. And so that's kind of where I come from. Definitely research, understanding, very technical, but also able to actually explain things out in a very end user or business way so people actually can be on the same page and gain the insight and perspective.
So you've written, Doug, about what you refer to as the autonomous enterprise. What do you mean by that? And is this a real thing, or is this just a good catchy sci-fi title?
Yeah, so I always give credit where it's due. So the original term I heard it from was Horses for Sources. They said, "Hey, there's a Thomas Enterprise," and I said, "There's no way. Like we're not even there yet." But then it kind of percolated to give a word to it in my head, and I was like, "Wait, there is a way." There's many companies that have reached out or I've worked with and looked at and said, "Wait, this is possible." And really looking how Microsoft Copilot or AI agents or autonomous agents are coming out, especially with GPTs, there's some wins there because it does build that that interim area where people can interact. So a lot of it goes back to, especially the automation side, we're looking to how do we build human in the loop, and how do we dive into that, and how do we drive that interaction. Whereas with these autonomous agents, actually it understands some nuance and it can understand business tactics and business understandings. Why can't we build that in the loop and then still minimize some of that human interaction? But you still want a human at the end, right? To be able to verify, is this correct? Is this what we want to go into production? Is this what we want to go into the business? Is this the way forward? Does this tie into that enterprise or that business's, methods and what nows, right? So that's the change. Is it's a matter of we're now enabled, and since we are battling time, now it's a matter of how fast can we get this? Can we do data-driven analytics? Can we do data-driven analysis to drive all that? And this is where we're going. And that's so. Is it possible? Yes. Do we have all the players in play yet? We're very close. There's a lot of players out there, but they're disconnected. I'm waiting to see if some of these bigger platforms look to acquire or look to build in this to say, wait, we can actually offer this as a service because many companies out there are going to be wanting this features.
Chris?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you said, lots of the technology pieces are out there and so forth. And what was going through my mind is there was a time when Microsoft Office didn't exist, and there was a company, Excel. There's a company, PowerPoint.
Yep.
So things that I suspect in just a handful of years we're going to sort of take for granted are the piece parts that are out there as part of the ecosystem. But the hardest part and the key part is always the integration of those pieces. And I know that's something you focus on a lot as well.
Yeah, because automation is about integration. And really, even when we talk about AI, the way I describe AI and Gen AI and kind of where this is going is AI was the traditional AI, the academic AI was very much like the programming language of AI. It was very nuts and bolts and ins and outs. Gen AI is more the interface. We're interfacing with it now, many different multimodal ways. We're actually building marketplaces for this type of stuff. It's building apps. That's the interface. That's where we are. And then with potentially AGI, if we actually hit that, that will be the operating system. And so when we have that, then we'll have exactly the same stuff we've seen for the last every 10, 20 years of combining a systems moving and growing, all the way from like office tools that you talked about to like DevOps to IoT to, now edge computing and then autonomous enterprise.
So what are the pieces, Doug? AI is certainly one of them, and I want to drill down on that. But what are some of the other components that you see as imperative, where we say, okay, if we're at maybe it's not a 10 out of 10, but a 7 out of 10 in these couple categories, this is actually achievable?
Yeah. So in the past, we've had especially when I was at Cisco, we worked a lot on IoT, and IoT was a huge thing. Like, let's get the data, different areas of the systems and the nomenclature out there, the devices have all this data, and talking about medical and everything else, like this data is there, but how do you get it? And no one could really ever get IoT all the way to get it to where it was everywhere. But now with like an autonomous agent or an AI agent, you can actually have an agent that listens or does a pull or does a vectorization from this data set, that now these separate data pools versus these large data lakes can be pulled from, know what truth is, build that out, and then drive it to more of like a more organized, orchestrated data lake of a sense, which becomes also part of the autonomous enterprise. So it's driving that interconnectivity. It's pulling those different parts and putting them all together. But it's hard for a human to do that, and it's hard for systems to be integrated to just do it automatically in some cases, because there's so much nuance that having an autonomous agent has the ability to say, oh, I understand this, and this device. And then you can actually then iterate and drive it to handle more.
What's your sense as to the Gen AI stuff in the last year? Has this actually helped advance us closer to this autonomous enterprise concept, or has it been a distraction? Because like a lot of the clients I speak to, on one hand, they're now keen on AI, where maybe a couple of years ago there was some disillusionment, or they thought it was an R&D project or whatever. But on the other hand, now they're seeing all the horror stories in the news and saying, hey, maybe we got to slow down, because this is not new, right? A lot of this stuff is not new. So is the ChatGPT the missing piece, or is it just kind of accelerating the adoption? What do you think?
Yeah, so the adoption is accelerating. ChatGPT did a lot in regards to the same way that Google search did for the internet with people. So once you get the people on board and the people say, wow, this is really handy, or it answers my questions. I know more people now that use like ChatGPT or one of these language models to go search that first instead of going to Google now. So there's a massive change, and that change goes back to culture, right? And culture as a whole, as like a civilization or an organization, same thing is changed by the people, not the people that are in charge. Like Google and OpenAI can't say this is the culture now. No, it's the people that use it that define the culture. So we are still battling speed, and in that we're trying to drive analytics around it and trying to say, hey, where do we go? But utilizing these tools is to making that adoption much faster, because people are starting to get to know it. The issue there, though, just like in the news stories you hear, is that the guy that ended up being deep faked and losing $25 million or so, that's a big issue. Not in the fact of the deep fakes, it's the fact that people aren't digitally savvy enough in the world now to know, hey, the world around you is changing. We now need to be aware that there are these threats that most of us aren't actually aware of, but we need to start talking about it and normalizing and saying, hey, we need some double checks here. And it's okay to ask, wait, are you sure you're you? I'm going to call you on a different phone line, or I'm going to give me your personal number. I'll call you, make sure it actually is you. Some kind of verification, because you just don't know anymore, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, if I may, I saw a post, I think this morning, where someone was talking about the AI video enhancement and video editing has gotten so advanced in terms of the angle of light hitting things that you faked in there, that we're reaching the point where it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, to determine if something is a deep fake video or not. And there's huge implications in that, as the entire world is moving towards reliance of those sorts of signals. So from a distributed perspective, is what do you think in terms of dealing with those sorts of compliance and validity and veracity kind of questions that are going to come up?
Well, I think that question is usually probably going to be answered by the CISOs, the CISOs, and the security folks, because, and in really talking to many of them, they're all behind. Like we're not ready for this in any sense of the word. So there are companies out there that are doing some really neat things. There are companies that are actually in the security space that are driving to start using Gen AI to combat Gen AI. And that's a very great move in the right direction, because you even see like ads on like the TV sometimes. Google says there's 125,000 something people missing in the security space. yes, but like we need to find a way to do this better and do it with even less people, but we need to enable and empower our people to have the ability to analyze these logs at a faster rate. Those same logs that are being analyzed that can drive automatic or automated tasks to actually shut down ports, move things, throw these users into like whoever's coming in, this bad actor or issue that's happening needs to be thrown into like a virtual environment that is not going to impact the actual environment. So there's a lot of things that I've talked about on LinkedIn where I believe one of the patents that Oracle came out with is doing that, and that's pretty amazing. Where they can have almost like a multiverse of, hey, you're coming in, you look bad, or we need to trust you. That layer of trust is going to get you closer to the source, but right now you live in like this multi-varied level of environments, and you have to navigate through that.
At the risk of being the dorky Trekkie here, it sounds back to the hologram on the Enterprise.
I mean, in some cases, right? There's definitely a lot of Star Trek stuff to this, especially if you get deeper into the enterprise AI and Gen AI capabilities and the lack of there, because of the amount of infrastructure needed. When you look at the issues around when you're doing Gen AI and you're saying, hey, I want to touch my SharePoint stuff, and I'm finding out that if I move anything on SharePoint, I lose all my RBAC, my roles, access, and controls. That's a huge issue that not a lot of people are talking about. But how do we do that better then? And then so anybody that's going into Gen AI is going to start looking right back at their ops groups, their security groups, and saying, hey, how do we track whose role is what, whose access is what, and are they the president, are they the captain of the ship? Like, how are we driving this? And then you can have the discussion like, well, who gets which AI agent or who gets which autonomous agent to help them drive and do the role better. That's the next big thing, right? And I think even talking about some of the virtual environments, I think you started with the show with, and like, virtual machines, and then like even like AVDs, like Azure virtual desktops, some of these things, you have to understand where they're coming from, and you have to know where your users are when they're onboarded, what access controls do they have, so that you can control what's actually going on in your enterprise. And a lot of enterprises have that issue right now.
So break it down, Doug. And you've spent a lot of time in the RPA space. Before people were really talking too much about AI. A lot of terms and kind of models have been thrown around over the years, right? So, at one point there was this thing. I think it was a lot of the RPA vendors were pushing a bot for every employee kind of model. Then you started hearing this. You referred to it before, this kind of human in the loop model. Now you hear everything's co-pilot, which brings me back to the bot for every employee thing. Everything's co-pilot. What is this autonomous enterprise look like? You play this out 3 years. What's the model? Is it the same amount of people with these things sitting on their desktops helping them? Is it less people doing better quality stuff? Is it really like that old meme? I don't even know what movie it's from, where the guy's just sitting there with a cup of coffee monitoring the company running itself. Where do you see the reality in there?
That's Homer Simpson, by the way.
Right. There's definitely, you have to remember that humans and people want to trust something, and sometimes that trust gets us in trouble, because this is why we personify things. But you still have to have the human as part of the program, or part of the actual loop of this. And so when you look at, yes, a bot for every person didn't always work out very well. When you look at hyper automation, didn't always work out very well. The human in the loop always didn't work out very well. But when you look at the abilities of those very static and very standardized task bots versus what we can look at and see with like GPTs or the potential of GPTs, I wouldn't trust them quite yet, but they're getting there, or autonomous agents, which we're moving to, then the orchestration of that and how that works is, again, it's not going to be a bot or autonomous agent or an AI agent for every person. What it's going to be is large swaths of groups of these agents that handle certain tasks. So, for example, like if you were a security person, you would have like, you were doing your job, managing your logs and stuff, but you would have agents that are running, that are checking logs for certain aspects, other agents that are checking even further along the lines. And then you have agents that are actually testing those, or building in automations to actually test, are the tests that these agents testing correct? And so you're able to basically have a group of people do a whole lot of work for very little, but also being able to maintain all of that. And so you're basically building them as assistants to assist in data analytics so that then the human can take that data driven understanding and say, okay, this is the actual data. This is the tested, the verified, trust but verified data. This is the source of truth. I can now take action on it. And if we need to shut down everything because there's an alert saying like we're being literally hijacked and all of our stuff is being encrypted as we speak, then they can actually take that action much faster. And so that's part of the issue. But also, like, we have to understand that in this ever-changing world, we're not going to get it right all the time. Things are going to fail, things are going to break, and that's how things get better. And so we have to be kind of cognizant of that and kind of understanding and say, some of the security guys, like, you're going to get hacked no matter what. If somebody wants to hack you at this point, it's doable. And Gen AI is much enabling that more now than ever. So don't probably fire those guys. Let them learn from their mistake, even though it's going to be a very costly mistake, but learn from it and grow with it, because we all learn from failure.
You think that guy that cut that $25 million check kept his job?
Pretty sure unless he starts saying, wait, I can have webinars that help people understand how not to do this and like really adopt that own that loss, own that mess up, maybe. But ideally, the usual use case for most enterprise or larger companies is like somebody's got to take the fall, and that's the sad truth of it. So.
But but part of that is, good old fashioned checks and balances, right, Chris? I mean, we've seen this within organizations that, they do it really poorly without automation and AI. Now you're doing it at scale. It's going to happen in a much more accelerated way, right?
Well, and Doug, to extend on what you were saying, I'd love you to add to this. I mean, I've been an engineer myself for a very long time, and trying to achieve success is the attractive, fun part, but also trying to avoid the failure is at least as necessary, but it's not as cool. So we don't put as much time and energy into that. But I think it's the combination of the two that puts you in the winner circle at the end of whatever you're trying to achieve. Would you tend to agree?
Yeah, no, I mean, never let the great be the enemy of good enough or something like that. But like always do your checks and balances, always do your trust and verify. I think the issue is like checks and balances work as far as an understanding, right? The people have to understand. And we saw this when computers came out. We saw this when the internet came out. Anytime something new and innovative comes out, there is always a pendulum swing. There's always that it's going to go one way, and it's like, okay, we're going to massive security, and then we're like, yeah, that doesn't really work. We can't actually move. We're kind of like stuck in sand, over here. And then it kind of comes back a little bit. You're like, whoa, that's too far back. Now everybody's getting in. So we have to find that niche. Nobody has the right answers, but it's kind of one of those things we got to do together. And then there's the ethical side, right? How do we do this ethically? And really, I think the ethical thing to even talk about now is corporations need to understand, and these enterprises need to understand, don't go full bore, Gen AI, and don't just try to get the shiny thing in the room, because you're going to cause more breakage, because you don't have, half these companies don't have automation or standards or how do things work. Most of their standard core processes aren't even rugged enough to really handle moving at that speed. And so then you're going to have prompt injections, you're going to deal with users. I think the biggest fear right now is that with everybody hyping this up and enterprises seeing this, they want everybody to be able to, like, I want all my employees to be able to talk to this thing. Great. How much does that cost? Well, it's 2 cents per token. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, nobody knows. So if you're going to provide this to your users and you're going to spin it up and you're going to get it out before the end of 2024, well, guess what? By that time, you're going to be like, why am I spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and I'm not seeing any value? I might be seeing value, but I have no way to actually contemplate that. So what is the ROI? What is the end all be all? What you end up having is massive. You thought shadow IT was bad. Like, you're going to have massive prompting and retokening of the same things without even knowing what's going on. This is where topics like AI spanning comes in, where that's something we can jump into, but it's something I talk about, where you're using automation to drive a lot of these efforts, but that same time you're using LLMs and tokens to actually help drive some of that nuance of that human in the loop, but drive some of that. Maybe it starts it, maybe it handles some middle stuff, or it handles it at the end to say, hey, this is where this is going. But really, automation being on rails, being very rugged and already able to handle a lot of this can build in that audit that you need to know, well, where are we going? So I think that's really the case here.
So I was at a dinner about a month ago and with a bunch of technology leaders talking about implementing AI, and several of the people had said their organizations had rolled out policies against the use of AI. And I'm
Mhm.
putting on like my legal hat, and I'm thinking the only thing worse than having, the only thing worse than not having a policy for dealing with this stuff is having a policy that you can't enforce. And to
Right.
your point about shadow IT, this is an instance of
Yeah.
it would be very difficult to enforce a ban on the use of the technology. So far better to have kind of a reasonable approach to it and some guidelines, and then comparing against those guidelines as opposed to that sort of policy. Is that sort of your sense as well? Because that
Yeah.
shadow IT thing always comes back.
It always comes back, right? I mean, ever since, yeah, it's been forever. But I think the way to look at it is when you're looking at how people relate to this, I look at kind of how schools relate to this right now. And it's a matter of, do we use Gen AI inside of schools? Most people say, oh, don't do it, it's cheating and stuff. But what's the point of the school? So if the point of the school is to not cheat and just memorize everything, is that really learning? But I think the goal of schools and colleges is to make better adults. And I think we need to be more responsible as adults and take our own responsibility in our own hands and say, okay, if you're going to use ChatGPT, if you're going to use these LLMs and you're going to supplement that or supplement knowledge or build something out, there should be a criteria like it shouldn't be copying and pasting, or it should be, well, what was your prompt? Like the goal should be, is this person the adult we're trying to train them to be? Is this person understanding the knowledge and the logic behind it? Can they actually, this is where I say authenticity is probably one of the biggest things in 2024 and going into the future is, I have a post, I try to post every day. And in that, sure, some of that is like chat GPT helped, right? But I try to put a lot of my own thoughts, my efforts, my goals in there. But you can just do that. Or also I talk to it because I show up. I'm here right now speaking. Like this is not an avatar, right? Like I'm speaking to you and showing the authenticity because I know what I'm talking about because I've done the research. So in that, that's the goal. The goal is, can this person that we're training in this college, can this person that we're training in this enterprise, can they show up and be authentic? Can they be responsible for their actions and do what they're supposed to do and what they're expected to do? Yes, great, we're winning. If they can't, there's a problem. And then we have to figure out, how do we fix that problem? And then again, like I said, innovation is changing, and we have to learn from what we get.
I agree with you, Doug, especially around the education component. I think we have to be more focused on what I call the inevitability piece of things, right? Not is this, and I even posed the question before, it's human nature, like is this good or bad, and pros and cons. The reality is, it doesn't matter. It's inevitable, right? So how can we, implement it the right way? And then the other piece of it is, back to the conversation about deep fakes. We're testing right now here at IRPA. We're testing, outbound AI callers
Mhm.
that pass the
Okay,
Turing
good.
test in a lot of scenarios where you can't tell that
Yeah.
it's a conversational AI agents that you can't tell, right? Now you had deep fakes in there, right? So I was talking to some family the other day, and they were asking me, how can you tell? I'm like, that's the wrong question. I just assume it's not real. Assume it's fake. What do you do with information? You get an email from something that says, I want to update my banking information. What's your process now to make sure and verify and do your compliant, right? Because otherwise, you're gonna get hit at some point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you will. I mean, even then, I don't like. So everybody hates the phone calls and the robocalls, right? We've had those for years, and they're just horrible. Or like, hit number 9 if you want to do this thing. But if you could have, contextual conversation with some of these stuff from certain companies I've looked at, it's pretty darn good. And the fact is, you actually get more help. So you can say, "Oh, I want to talk to an agent." You're still going to get an AI agent, but it's so good that you can actually have the conversation, ask what you want, and actually get a better response.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of, it has the nuance, it has the understanding, and I think really the companies get to go back in, and this is where it's like a bot for every person, or a AI for every person that runs a goal, because you can do more with Gen AI. You can answer more questions. It can actually take context in, like, oh, hey, I have an issue with this invoice. Oh, it's like, oh, hey, send me your invoice. Just text it to me. Great. send it over. Even if it's an AI agent, guess what? It's reading it, it's understanding it, it has more context, and it's probably faster than the human anyway. So in those cases, I think it's great. In the cases where you're hoping to get information, or you're looking at the news and the future is some AI avatar talking to you, that's just weird. Some of these AI avatars are still very hokey. And it's kind of, it freaks me out when you actually see one. You're like, wait, is it real? Is it not real? And you know it's fake, but it looks real. It gives you that uneasy feeling. So
The uncanny gap, they call it, or uncanny canyon, whatever that
yeah,
is. Yeah.
it's like when you have you get like an animal, like you have a cat or a dog, and then you have a stuffed animal, and they look at it like, is that real? I don't know. And then like the way they interact is the way we're going to do that with these human avatars. Like, is that a me, or is that not me? And then that's the weird world to live in.
Well, as you're saying that, you're also bringing up another point that I've seen actually grow quite a bit over the last couple of decades, and that's the sense of polarity, where if something is kind of a commodity, I don't really value it, just get it to me fast, cheap, I don't really care. That should be just as automated as possible. And then the other far end is if it's something that's differentiated based upon the experience, the connection, the context, or whatever, that requires a human intervention. And I think that we are actually being trained through our interaction with the technologies we have, like our phones and so forth, to have that deep sense of that polarity. When you went to business school 40 years ago, it was all about make everything as average as possible. You can have any color Model T as long as it's black, because you're trying to maximize economies of scale and scope. And our technology has now thrown that out the window. If it's undifferentiated, make it as cheaply as possible. If it's differentiated, you can charge almost anything for it. But the quality of the interaction then matters. Is that kind of jive with what you're seeing in this automated enterprise you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance of that, right? Any kind of multifunction machine always has multiple points of failure, right? So in that, there's the ability for that to happen. Although the idea is, again, it gets better and better. I think to your point, it kind of goes back to that Apple Vision Pro thing of how does this come into play? And really that's going to be in part of what the next generations coming in are going to want to do. Maybe they want to have this enablement. Maybe they want to wear this thing on their face the entire time, or it gets better. There's like the VR conversation about full dive versus half dive. And that's where essentially with these BCMs, these brain controller, machines, that you have the ability to maybe control things with your mind, like your hands in this VR, AR stance, like you can do other things. So there's a whole world that's coming that we aren't ready for even then. But again, like time and how things move at very fast rates, we have multiple industries making massive moves, and this Apple Vision Pro is one step in a whole other direction. And not to even mention quantum computing and everything else I don't want to get into because it's so deep. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on, and really, as we see these massive mega trends happening, you also see those same ripple effects throughout the world, like other countries, other regions, the entirety of the world, and how we all interact with each other. It's very interesting to see how it all kind of correlates.
Doug, I remember talking to somebody, God, it's got to be a dozen years ago, a technologist, futurist type of person. And, asking him similar questions, obviously different types of technology at that point, but similar types of questions. And he said, Dan, let me put it this way. He goes, everything that you want to do, you can do with technology today. That was 12 years ago. But he said, the issue is the adoption and the scale. And I think about that all the time with all the technology all of us are, involved in, and every wave of emerging tech. It seems to me that it's the culture change, and then in enterprises, the org structure that's the biggest limiting factor. Do you see that, Doug? And our organizations finally start to put those silos to rest?
Yeah, I wish. Enterprises are
Optimistic question, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, enterprises are always like that large, very slow-moving ship that gets stuck in the not the Suez Canal, but the Panama Canal, right? They get stuck in their own ruts. Some of that's, but a lot of the ways that enterprises and just companies get stuck is because of the digital savviness. They're not able to move at the same rate. They're not able to learn or to drive or to upskill themselves at a rate that says like this is the way to go. But then you also have, and this is stuff that I talk about when I see some of these like end of quarter reports, you have companies on the public side. The very public companies are very innovative. They're always the first to jump in, the first to try something, and because they want to try to get that 10x, right? But you have these private companies in the same regard are very, and they're enterprise, and they're very like, we don't want to take the risk. There's a lot of like the country's doing this, the government's doing this. Like there's all these like nuanced outside source things that are like pressures on them. And so they don't want to take the risk. So they wait until the public companies either make it or break it. And then if they see, okay, what's the best business practice? And then they bring in vendors to say like, hey, can you tell us how to do this? So all that said, like it's a slow moving thing, but we're in a fast moving world now. And that's the issue. The issue is no enterprise can move fast enough. And I think we're going to start seeing that very soon in the next probably less than 3 months at this point. I think probably come March or May, we're going to see a massive either disconnect or a massive like understanding like, wait, we need to do something different because these enterprises aren't going to be able to keep up with the medium and small businesses, because these medium and small businesses that are SaaS based, they're very on the cloud, living there, driving it, have smaller teams that are more agile, that actually look to innovate and iterate very quickly, are going to start surpassing some of these enterprises. And it's going to be a very big culture shock.
The digital transformation project at Blockbuster was called Netflix, right?
It was.
Guarantee Blockbuster had like a streaming, sample, but
Yep,
by
they
not
did.
really adopting it, they got digitally transformed, just not how they expected.
Now there's just one left in Bend, Oregon. So
That's right.
Is it really? It's like
Yeah.
a museum.
there's one. Yeah, they have like some of the gladiator stuff from Russell Crowe's days there, and some other stuff. It's pretty interesting.
There's a documentary on that. I think it might
Yeah.
even be on Netflix, if you can believe that or
It
not.
might be actually, yeah.
It probably is.
Doug, thank you so much. Really always enjoyed talking to you, and we'll have you on in a couple more weeks. The world will probably be different even in a month or two.
Very well could be. Yeah, appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Doug.
So, Chris, good conversation, and I like that thing we talked about before. This inevitability thing. I think we just gotta have more conversations like this. Stop talking about what are the pros and cons, and just start talking about it's happening and how do we manage it, scale it, right?
Well, Doug brought up a great point from an education perspective, right? And I was thinking back to not being able to use calculators when I was in high school or college, right? Well, okay. You don't want me to use generative AI in school so that because you're worried that I might cheat. Why not instead do we let you use it so you can show us how to use it without cheating?
Yeah.
Right. There's sort of a very glass half empty, glass half full there. And I think we'd be better off taking the positive perspective of use it and we're going to teach you how to use it ethically, correctly, et cetera, as opposed to automatically assuming the result's going to be bad. So
I'll never forget my shout out to my high school physics teacher who said to me, they gave us this reference table. And I remember asking her, like, why are you giving us all the formulas? Like, isn't that something we're supposed to remember? And she said, no, the whole idea of learning is to use the tools that you have and think intelligently. And then, she mentioned, I don't know if it's a true story, that that anecdote about Einstein never knew his phone number. Why would he need to know his phone number, right? It's in the phone book. So yeah, that's the way we should be teaching. And that's a whole nother topic, just the world of education and the disconnect. We'll save that for another show, but yeah, it's time to wake up on the inevitability thing.
And embrace and learn how to live with it because it's not going away.
Great conversation. Thanks as always, Chris. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We're live first and third Wednesday of every month at noon Eastern. In the meantime, check out IRPAAI.com for free membership or to schedule a complimentary industry use case briefing. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks, Chris.
See ya. Take care.